Hey everyone, this is Andy Hall. You're watching an episode of Best Advice Ever, the show where awesome people come on and give the best advice they ever heard. Now, you may have noticed from the person to over there, I'm going to get awkward, that's what I am. Our guest today is Mr. John Hamill. John, and as usual, I'm just going to read his about section from his lovely website for his show, Free Thought Profit. Let's do that. John is a secular campaigner who has previously had leadership roles within both Atheist Alliance International and Atheist Ireland. His degree was in computer science, and so he apologizes in advance for his insistence that AM Turing was the world's greatest ever genius. We're going to have to talk about this before we talk about the best advice ever, and that artificial intelligence represents an existential threat to both traditional religion and the idea of free will generally. I can't agree with you more than that. I totally agree. Yeah, Turing, maybe not. But let's continue. John's other most controversial opinion is that Scotch and bourbon are unfit for human consumption.
Mm-hmm.
He also believes that peated whiskey tastes like something that is properly disposed of by flushing, but he has an open mind on all other Irish whiskeys. Unsolicited donations of the same are gratefully accepted. John was raised in a Roman Catholic family, but he is now a pious and devout Pastafarian. And we'll talk about your contact information when we get down, at the end of the show. How are you doing, John?
I'm very well, thanks. I hope you're well.
So far, so good. The day is still young. Well, it is here because it's only 11 o'clock in the morning.
Well, it's a bit later here. It's not quite late enough to try some of the Irish whiskey that you just mentioned, but I have a national stereotype to live up to, so I'll get to that a bit later this evening. Excellent.
I'm glad that you're meeting the standard, maybe right. Even excelling the standard.
That's right.
Okay.
We'll have to do our best.
Okay, so if we were going to do most genius minds in history, you have Mr. Turing on one side and Isaac Newton on the other.
Exactly. Yes.
How would they compare? Are they in the same weight class?
So here's my argument in favor of Turing. I think if you ask most people in like the hard sciences today about the smartest guy ever, you'll hear arguments for Einstein and very often Isaac Newton. But if you look at the physicists, let's say, who are very smart people who have come up with all of the mathematical equations that describe the laws of nature, they at least have nature to compare their equations against. So maybe that's what are all the physics problems we remember from school? Maybe that's rolling a sphere down an inclined plane, or in Newton's case, wasn't it? Kepler's data or someone else's data that he could compare to when he was composing his laws of gravitation. Against that, Turing just started with a blank sheet of paper with nothing to compare it to, nothing at all, and produced, innovated, created, discovered some just wonderful mathematics that tells us an awful lot about. He kind of invented computation just by the way. As a mechanism to prove a theorem in pure mathematics, he just kind of casually invented computing along the way. I suppose you could say something like that for Newton also. Didn't he invent calculus just because it was useful?
I guess just because it was useful. I think some of those Leibniz, I don't know. I'm butchering his name. I think his fans might be saying that maybe their guy there, Leibniz, created it, or maybe they created it at the same time, kind of like some kind of weird convergent evolution of mathematics.
Well, there you go. There's another analogy. Alonzo Church did a lot of the same things that Turing did independently at the same time. There you go.
Very interesting. I did not know that. So if we were going to say that Newton had shoulders to stand on, you would say that pretty much computer science basically has Turing's shoulders to stand on. And Turing didn't have anyone's shoulders in all reality. He was...
Exactly that. And I don't know if this is one of these apocryphal stories, but that phrase that, as you say, Newton used. I'm going to butcher this if I try and quote it verbatim. It's something like, "If I have seen further than others, it's because I was standing on the shoulders of giants."
Indeed.
I read a book once that said his main adversary or contemporary or nemesis at the time was a guy called Robert Hooke, who was practically a dwarf. So when he said he was standing on the shoulders of giants, he was actually having a go at his mate down the road, who he didn't like very much. So you could also make the argument around Newton that smart guy, but actually an asshole.
Oh, he was crazy. He was crazy as the day is long, Mr. Newton. Yeah.
Yeah, he's into alchemy and stuff like that as well. Isn't that right?
He was into finding the philosopher's stone, turning base metals into gold. Not too good with interpersonal relations, but there's a lot of us who might be somewhat
That's a superb euphemism there, Andy. Not too good at interpersonal relations.
Not too good. You know, if he was alive today, I'm sure he'd have a podcast. That's what I think.
Indeed. I suspect he would use some colourful ad hominem as well.
Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a great place to pivot on to the best advice you ever heard.
Sure. So I'm going to go with, it wasn't personal advice, it was generic advice offered in a television interview by Penn Jillette. I think most people will know Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller.
Yeah.
So he was asked once about advice that he would give to, it was an interview about religion, and he was asked about advice that he would give to anyone experiencing doubts. And I guess that's normally an introduction for people to say things along the lines of, well, you know, here's some obvious contradictions in the Gospels. You can look at things like the final words of Jesus before he died. They're different in different Gospels. You can look at things like discovering the empty tomb. I think one of the Gospels says that the women were too scared to tell anyone, so they stayed quiet about it. And another Gospel says they were just overjoyed and they ran off to tell everyone. So you can point out lots of contradictions, or you can point out lots of things where Jesus says things that aren't quite kosher. You know, depending on his rude mood, Jesus could be quite racist. He liked to discriminate against various ethnic groups, like Samaritans and Canaanites weren't the favorite of Mr. Christ. But Penn Jillette's advice was he didn't kind of have a hitch slap ready or have a go at this aspect or that aspect of religion. He just said, listen, go and read the Gospels, pick them up, start at chapter 1, verse 1, and start reading. And I did that, and for sure, I mean, you can see lots of things that seem a bit immoral, but the abiding memory that I had that really convinced me at a time in my life when I was having some doubts, it just convinced me that this is all a lot of nonsense, is that the books are so incredibly dull. I mean, first you have you essentially have four biographies, 4 life stories of this dude who, as far as I can make out, never tells a single joke in his entire life. He never says anything humorous or witty. And even if you look at things like the wedding feast of Cana, Mary's encouraging him to, hey, you know, you have magic powers, son. Why don't you magic up some wine there? And Jesus is being enormously grumpy about the whole thing, and Mary has to twist his arm. But aside from that, if you just read through it, if you read through it with the premise in your mind of what the Christian story is, in other words, Yahweh created the universe 13.8 billion years ago, and it's all building up to this moment. It's all building up to, here's the time, here's when the Son of God comes to earth and he leaves us this book, and here it is. Read through the book that we've all been waiting for. I mean, it's just incredible dross, you know. Jesus does an exorcism, flip the page. Jesus does another exorcism. Maybe he kills a fig tree, and then he does another exorcism. But yeah, I read through the thing, and what made my mind up was it was just incredibly boring, and I thought this cannot be the final word from heaven to humanity. But I think that it was good advice mostly because instead of trying to convince you, you know, with some zinger argument that you have ready, it was, look, go and make your own mind up. And if you can't make your own mind up by reading the actual book that was sent to you from heaven, the world's only supernatural book, then there's kind of a problem if that doesn't make your mind up. So I have 4 kids, Andy. That's the approach that I take with my kids as well. Now, after listening to Penn Jillette's advice, I don't tell them to go off and read the Bible necessarily, but I tell them to make their own minds up with respect to religion. So, of my 4 kids, I think the eldest would still count herself as a Catholic. The next one down is a committed atheist, and the bottom 2 haven't made their minds up yet. But yeah, I tell them, you know, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to believe, that'll be fine. You just make your own mind up. Yeah, I think when I think back on my childhood, the things that annoy me about religion aren't so much. I mean, you can give a religious upbringing to a child just focusing on, you know, the golden rule and the nice bits where Jesus appears to be meek and mild, and leave out the nasty bits. But yeah, the bits that annoy me were the kind of mandatory or compelled nature of, you have to read this, you have to believe that, you have to attend this service. So I'm hopeful that at least if I let the kids make their own mind up, they might be less inclined to resent their father when we're all a bit older.
Very good. What do you attribute to one of your kids identifying as Catholic, and then the next one down is a self-professed atheist?
So that's a good question. Firstly, I should say the school system here in Ireland is pretty unique in the world. So the majority of our state-funded schools are Roman Catholic run. So the primary schools have, for example, 2.5 hours per week of faith formation. And parents like me are then left with, your choice is essentially either allow your child to go ahead with all of the carpenter worship stuff and join in with the rest of the kids, or else ostracize them to the back of the class, which isn't much fun for them either. So I mean, no matter what I tell them, they'll get a grounding in Catholicism because that's just the way the Irish school structure is set up. Although it's, I think it's not irrelevant that my eldest, who's still a Catholic, is a girl, and the next one down is a boy. So if you look at statistics from a lot of the atheist groups around the world, there is a gender imbalance, which is, it's not a good thing. And I know a lot of atheist groups are looking at that. And I remember I spoke to a few academics who have studied this question. And there's a number of reasons that they would suggest for the gender imbalance. One obvious one is if you get a lot of blokes in the same group, they can very often turn into a bunch of assholes. And turns out ladies don't like hanging around with a bunch of assholes.
No.
And another one, which is more interesting, I think, is that there are fewer female atheists for the same reasons that there are fewer car crashes when women are driving. I don't know if it's the same where you are, but female drivers can get cheaper motor insurance here in Ireland, just as an actuarial matter.
Right.
Young men full of testosterone can be more aggressive and take more risks. And there's a suggestion that if you have a society in which the prevailing culture contains a lot of religiosity, then being a out atheist is a little risky, and therefore the young men full of testosterone are more likely to speak up. At least that's what some of the research suggests.
Now that's interesting. I thought, I mean, this is just my own hypothesis, poorly thought out, more than likely, is that due to the patriarchal nature of the society that we live in, women just feel less safe than men.
Yeah.
And so there's a natural inclination for them to turn towards religion.
Yeah, I think that's true. As I understand it, the data also shows that in countries that are less economically advanced, where people are more focused on survival values, how are we going to put food on the table this week and next week, those societies have higher levels of religiosity.
Yep.
Whereas in countries where the values tend more towards hedonistic ideas around how can we develop different activities that we all enjoy, and people are less focused on surviving from day to day and week to week, those societies become more atheist. And yeah, exactly as you say, maybe women can often feel less safe in patriarchal societies, which means they have the same bias or the same tendency that we just mentioned.
Right. And here's another question. Did both children read the Gospels?
I don't think either has done what I did. Just pick up the book and start reading from chapter 1, verse 1. Although, I mean, as part of when I have discussions with my son, we'll come back and from school and say, oh, the priest came into class this day and he mentioned this thing, but he didn't mention this other thing in the other verse, So I remember he mentioned once the priest came in one day and he was talking about the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, and who could disagree with that? But if you read down through the next verses, there's a list of woes after the list of blesseds, and the first one is woe to the rich, and his attitude was, well, I would rather be rich than poor. What's wrong with being rich? I think there's logic in that. I wouldn't object to being super rich one day. So I don't see why heaven needs to disapprove of that.
Right. Good points. Your two youngest, are they both boys? Is it a boy or a girl? Or
no, my oldest is a girl, and then I have a son and twin girls who are the youngest. So their religion at the minute is TikTok, as far as I can make out. That's what they spend their life doing. It's bizarre. I don't know if you watched that Tiger King thing.
I have not.
Okay. Well, anyone who has seen it will know that Carol Baskin is one of the characters in it, and this dude Joe Exotic sings a couple of songs about Carol Baskin. So on TikTok, there's a bunch of dances to those songs, and I watch my twins learning the dancing and doing their TikTok, and they're having fun. And they're singing these songs about Carol Baskin, but they have absolutely no idea who this is.
That's hilarious.
Me and my wife have watched it thinking, what the hell is going on here with these young girls singing songs about Carol Baskin?
I was on your show back in April.
Yes, indeed.
Free Thought Prophet. And we touched on Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. And partially based on our conversation, I started watching it. I'm in the second season right now. And just finished the first episode of the second season. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I overall like it. I mean, there's some great atheist, manifesto moments in there.
Indeed, yeah.
And so and it's definitely, if you like Ricky Gervais, it is something to watch. Because they basically gave him, from my perception of like the Louis C.K. deal, when Louis C.K. got the Louis Show, they just said, you can do whatever you want. Here's some money. Don't bother us.
Yeah.
And so yeah, worth watching if you're a Gervais fan. There are moments, because I did some script writing for a while. There are some moments there I'm like, oh, you could have done this, or you could have done that.
Sure.
And but overall enjoyable. And
yeah, I thought so season 1, I don't think I'm giving anything away to say it's a comedy, but also the premise is someone suffering a lot from bereavement, so there's a lot of sad moments too.
There are.
I would have preferred if that balance was twisted a little away from the sad towards the funny in season 2. I think there were a few too many teary moments for my liking, but as I understand it, there's going to be a season 3, so maybe somebody else will be bereaved in season 3.
So I'm going to do some spoilers here.
Okay.
Specifically, did you have any problem with the death that occurred in season 1?
It was morally questionable, wasn't it? If I remember correctly, what you're referring to, the Gervais character gave a bunch of money to a drug addict in the knowledge that drug addict was going to use it to have an overdose.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So I don't know. One of my good friends here in Ireland is Michael Nugent.
Oh yeah, sure.
He's involved with the Right to Die movement here. So on one level, if someone's going through a particular trauma and they're having a tough time, or they have some mental health issues, then for sure it seems to me like a more coherent approach to that, to help them get treatment and feel better. Against that, if someone's thought about it a lot and has come to a rational conclusion for whatever reasons that they would prefer to check out, I'm not too sure if you come to that conclusion as a rational adult in possession of all your faculties, then it's your life, I don't think anyone else should be forced to tell you how to manage it.
I think the secret there is rational adult.
Yes, right? Indeed.
That's the thing. And whether or not an active drug user is a quote unquote rational adult. And I think my biggest issue with it is the lack of consequences, really, on Gervais's character. I think. Yeah. It could have been. See, like I was saying, it's like there's so much more that could have been eked out of that. And a lot of missed opportunities. But overall, I like it. I'm going to see the rest of this season, and I'll probably catch next season whenever it comes out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, they could have had Gervais meeting that guy's son or daughter, or brother or sister, or something like that, to look at the wider context. Or perhaps one of the other interpretations is that particular individual literally didn't have anyone, and this was actually a victimless crime, if you like. But yeah, they didn't. They just kind of left that storyline hanging, didn't they? They didn't really investigate it.
Right. If there's something so major, they just left it kind of whisking, in the breeze, just like flailing.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, this was a great conversation. Read the Gospels.
Read the Gospels, because they're really, really bad and boring and dull, and you will realize how awful they are if you actually read them. It's ironic, I think, that the accusation made by the religious towards secularists so often is, oh, you just cherry-picked that verse. Whereas it's closer to the truth, I think, to say, no, it's the priest who stands up every Sunday. He cherry picks the nice bits. Like, he doesn't read out the bits where Jesus is racist. So when people say, "Oh yeah, you're just angry atheist who went through the Bible to find some lines out of context that you can quote. That's why you're reading the Bible. And I think, no, you've got it the wrong way around. I didn't read the Bible because I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because I read the Bible.
Right. Well said. What's your favorite part in the Gospels? Do you have a favorite part?
In the Gospels, there's a good question. There's lots of favorite parts. I think the Gadarene swine is particularly crazy. So there's a number of parts of that. One is Jesus is just behaving in a total immoral and unethical way, murdering an innocent herd of pigs for no reason. And the other bit is that, the devil gets all the best lines in the Bible. So he asked this one dude who is possessed. He's referring to the demon and says, "What is your name?" And I think it's I'll butcher this if I try and get verbatim. It's something like, "Our name is Legion, for we are many," or something like that. So the devil gets all the best lines. So
Definitely.
when it comes to the pearly gates, Andy, if I'm offered to go upstairs and hang out with Mother Teresa and Padre Pio for an eternity, maybe I'll go downstairs. Seems to be more fun down there.
Yeah. I hear that they have an open bar down there. That's what I hear.
Well, as long as there's no scotch or bourbon, that'll be
right. Very good. Especially that peated stuff, which I had not even heard of until I was reading through your bio.
See, there you go. When you make scotch and bourbon, so the process is you get barley and you malt the barley. So you soak it until it starts germinating. That becomes malted barley. Then you have to dry it out and stop the germination before you start making the whiskey. Mm-hmm. And when they mix scotch and bourbon, typically the malted barley is exposed to smoke from peat or something else.
Okay.
And scotch and bourbon have a kind of smoky, rusty taste for that reason. Whereas when they make Irish whiskey, the malted barley isn't exposed to the smoke. And that's why Irish whiskey tastes really good and Scotch and bourbon taste really bad.
Very good. Very great. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Sir, where can people find you online?
So I'm on Twitter, but not Facebook. On Twitter, I'm at John Hamill 151. And the podcast I do with my good friend Seamus is the Free Thought Prophet. And you can find that on Twitter at the FT Prophet.
Well, once again, this has been a lot of fun, and thanks for coming on.
Cheers, man. That was good fun.
Okay, yeah. Take care.
Enjoy your day. All the best.
You too.
Bye.